All right, we are back at the State Aid for School Construction Working Group afternoon session and going to continue walking through draft legislation. Question to the committee is, did we resolve enough in the intent section, the statement of policy section, or do we want to revisit that? Or to John, do you have questions that we need to get further clarity on?
John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel, pulling it up on screen here. So the takeaways that I had were, and I may have to email folks just to refine the language, but capacity, scale / consolidation, reflecting statewide enrollment trends, and potentially we talked about looping in language from the task force report and potentially in that looping in also including the directions of the Commission for the Future of Public Education. So that's the set of requests that I see. Were there others that I should add to that? Also, people are obviously free to email me with specific language if you have specific language that you're thinking about.
I think we were thinking of your specific language about
Rulemaking.
prioritization, like putting a few specifics in there that we're talking about direction we want to see prioritization. Anything else?
I thought we decided not to invoke the name of any other organization just because it could.
Oh, the commission
things down.
All right, yeah, we can leave that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But there was the language of
the actual,
quality, equity, and sustainability.
Okay, yeah, those words are fine, but maybe not tied to other work being done in other.
so pulling in language rather than cross-referencing.
Okay.
Great, then let's jump down to 2. You're gonna see some highlighting here, which again reflects changes. I tried to, some of this is just me, I simplified the title. We had like capital construction program. It's a school construction program, so that's clear.
Thank you.
I can remove the blue highlighting that you see on line 17 because I think we've already discussed that we're gonna do a 2-step process. The real change you see, first real change you see is at the top of page 2. New responsibility for AOE, including as part of its budget submitted to the governor, its annual school construction funding request. This was the discussion prior about having the GovRec include, so getting out in front of the budgetary request. And there's a flow through change later in the draft as well, but I'll just pause if there are thoughts, but that's the concept.
Thank you, John. That's great.
I'll keep going then. At the top of page 3, you see some highlighting. This was condensing. This was a request from the last meeting to condense what was previously subdivisions 7 and 10. Prior subdivisions 7 said something like collecting and maintaining readily available public data on all schools. And I think that there'd been a desire to just capture what's done in this needs survey because the particular concerns were around capital needs. There's also some discussion around schools for closure, but I think the discussion around that was that it's not clear how that would be called out, given that it's already targeted for closure or an incidental effect of other decision making. On line 4, so subdivision 11. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to go back to the question we talked about. Line 3, all public schools. And we talked about independent, page 3, line 3. Looking at capital construction, reconstruction, maintenance, and other capital needs for all public schools. Would that include that independent school that has met the quality education?
Change the language.
Yeah. So aren't we kind of saying we're gonna keep it the way it currently is, that would include independent
Well,
schools?
it's not necessarily saying.
Or
it has
not,
to be the-
no, that meet the educational quality standards?
Well, we can, but we don't, we're not tied to current statute. That's
Right.
So.
Well, but question, isn't this is conducting a needs survey every 5 years?
Right, so are we requiring that we're requiring it here of all public schools? I'm going back to the conversation we had before lunch, that right now, school construction is for all public schools plus an independent school that meets all of the educational qualities or standards.
The EQR.
Yeah, I mean,
EQR.
I thought we agreed that we would include that.
We didn't agree.
not.
We never talked about it.
But why would that be tied to the needs assessment? Because this needs assessment also harkens back to Act 72, which is directed to play. So I'm
Just the public schools?
yeah, so I understand the question you're asking. I'm just wondering why we would tie it to the facilities needs assessment that we have to do.
Well, this is what the agency would be responsible for.
Yes,
And they're listed 1 through 15.
yes. Act 72 required us to do facility.
And this is part of the school construction program.
So if the independent schools that meet EQS though, might change every single year. How would we know which schools were responsible for doing the facilities? I think it's worth asking the question about the construction aid. I don't understand how it works.
But this is a construction program. We're,
How would we identify which schools we needed to do a facilities needs assessment on every 5 years, is my question.
I mean, I'm just looking at, we are in section 2, which is your school construction program. And what the agency of ed would be responsible for implementing the program and what you're responsible for within that program. So we haven't made a decision one way or the other. Any funding is going to go to that one independent school right now that would qualify. But we talked about that this morning.
Well, and I would add to that, not to interrupt you, that it's a needs survey list. Okay, so if they did apply for a construction loan,
They'd have to do it.
how would you know that they still, if they didn't put in their needs construction survey every 5 years? And that could be part of the EQS.
But this isn't a survey, this is us using state dollars. We send out consultants who go through every public school building in the state every 5 years. So are we saying that if a school, an independent school, receives construction aid, they would be added to the list?
Well, would they get aid if they didn't have? And if they didn't do a,
They were.
This isn't contingent, this isn't an eligibility requirement. In order to receive state construction aid under our current construction, that school, that independent school, would have to do a comprehensive facilities master plan. That is separate from the state keeping a statewide database on the current condition of all of our schools. Two different functions. We can tie them together. My question is, at what point are we determining that we are going to, that the agency is going to be responsible for sending out consultants to do a comprehensive facilities assessment, which is what we are currently doing for our public schools?
so that one independent school that currently would qualify if the school construction program was funded. That one independent school that does meet the EQS is not part of the survey that has been done.
They're not a public school. That's not what Act 72 directed us to do. But if they wanted to apply for state construction aid as an eligibility requirement, they have to do a comprehensive facilities master plan. I'm not saying the two things can't be connected. I'm just saying that they aren't.
Right, this isn't, we'd add somewhere else if we want to add it.
Yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
See all public schools.
Right.
Based on the conversation we had earlier. Just so folks are clear. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna soldier on. Line 4, you see the blue highlighting here. This was something I recall there just being doubts expressed as to whether it is necessary, developing a formal enrollment projection model or using projection models already available. I don't know if the group settled on an approach to this. I can leave this as is. I just recall there being doubts around this language, but that's it.
What was the doubt around?
I thought that the doubt was related to whether this was independently done elsewhere and therefore unnecessary, although I would note that the responsibilities listed here are picked up certain places from other language that I think it was envisioned if they're in session law or the like, we would strike them in those instances to hold everything in this place. But that's the extent of what I remember. If it's not ringing a bell to anyone, then I'm just gonna leave it, but.
Jill, does the AOE do formal enrollment projection numbers? I don't think.
I know Bob does. On a case-by-case basis, when someone asks us to review a construction project. Don't think we do, but it might be, I'm gonna claim ignorance, it might be some function of our data management team that I don't know about, but I've never seen one.
Yeah, no.
But it's
Districts-
seem like it's something we can and should be able to do. And that it would behoove us to do so.
Tied into the legislative intent as well, there's
Yeah,
that desire for
variety
statewide
of
enrollment
things.
trends.
Yeah.
So. Okay, I will leave that.
Hold on. Sorry. So the agency shall be responsible for developing a formal enrollment. Okay, so we're tasking you guys with that, but okay, great.
I wouldn't actually
Well, if there's an
object to that
or,
being part of our.
if there's an or, do we want the or do we want?
There might be projection models already, I mean, I know like,
A lot of
the
districts.
ACCD does their, like, for larger community demographics, so, I mean, I think I like the or. And
Okay.
then you could explore a variety of models and.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Jumping down to section 3. This is just reverting back to an advisory board since we've now removed that gatekeeping function. You'll see the changes, flow through changes starting on the top of page 4. Now advising on setting up this program or implementing, including the adoption of rules. On line 6 on page 4, I would note I still have this 8 highlighted on the right side of the page, just because you have an even number of members. It could result in unwieldy things, so.
Can I ask about the advisory board? Do we need to add more to this? Do we need to make it a little iffy? I'm just wondering, are people gonna look at this going, what is this group? What do they, I don't understand what they have to do. Or do you guys think it's clear enough?
It's under the duties. Page 5. Right? That would be the-
Yes.
Right?
I think the question is maybe bigger than what the set of responsibilities currently are in statute, to be more like, last week or 2 weeks ago, when we discussed, there was a clear gatekeeping function. And now we're back to a structure where providing input, but having no power over the agency and implementing the program. I guess there's a question as to some of the values that it floated around, where does this have some kind of public accountability built into it? Does it facilitate folks knowing what's going on in this space? I think it is a real question whether you think you're getting much utility out of this. I would note that later on in the draft, there'd been a request to sunset the board. So the idea that this board is being set up to help with creating the program, advising on creation of the rules, priorities and the like. And then at some point, the program would have fully formed, so to speak. There'd still be changes in the future, but the board would drop away. So if you're retaining that sunset, which puts the board in this kind of startup type position, I would ask, do you think that the board has sufficient duties or powers that it's really helping start up the program? Or are we just ending up with a board that doesn't add much? I mean, we've had different rationales floated as to what the value of this board would be, but the discussion of those rationales was kind of separate from the actual functions that we gave them, or that you guys gave. So looking at the duties today, I would ask, is there a good rationale for the duty of the CBA?
So I guess the question for two-part question is, when was the board established and do we know the intent under the original?
So this is creating this board. This is the new board.
Okay.
Exactly. And there had been different rationales floated when it was still unclear what the scope of the duties of this board would be. One would be having a major role in rulemaking. Another had been this public-facing piece. Yeah, I can't answer this question for you guys, but I can scroll down to the duties just so we can all be on the same page if you want to talk through any particular pieces. One of the original discussions had been around this advisory board. If you weren't doing a gatekeeping function, still having more to say in the rulemaking space, like a slightly stronger rule where there would be kind of a check-in to allow legislative or other input into the setup of the program. I don't know that I see that in the current construction. I mean, the board is meant to advise on these rules, so that's part of it, but we're not calling that out in any sort of distinctive way. It's just among the set of duties this board would have in setting up the program. We do call out project priorities as a specific point. Proposed legislation that the board thinks would be desirable. So there are utilities offered by this advisory board, but it's up to you guys whether you think it's sufficient to justify a new entity, basically.
I personally am still in favor of a gatekeeping capability. And if not, then I definitely am in favor of a sunset because I don't think an advisory board needs to go on in perpetuity. So that's kind of my 2 cents for right now.
What is the cadence by which priorities are going to be revisited? That's been my question about this.
Hold on, before we get to that, can I try to answer Chris's question quickly, which is just, Chris, I don't disagree with you. I think what gave me pause was, because if it's got gatekeeping, then doesn't it become like a quasi professional board or even a professional board? And then you're talking about, then thinking about salaries. And I was surprised at some of the salaries that are tied to some of the boards, and it just didn't, it seemed like kind of a non-starter for what we were doing. But I could be wrong, or maybe,
Well, I think that's a practical question. If you would want the gatekeeping function to be effective, you would need to set up things to make it function. So that might be salaries and the like.
right,
You could have a board that doesn't meet regularly. The result of that is that if you're waiting on this board to approve any rules prior to formal rulemaking, it's truly a gatekeeping. We're waiting on that board to hold meetings so that anything can proceed in that space. So professionalizing is probably a good idea in that space if you're trying to make this function smoothly and without hindrance, but it's a choice. But you're tasking with serious responsibilities and wanting regular check-in on rules proposed by the agency. It would definitely need to be done differently than it's currently set up, which I think is 6 meetings, and it's, you would have delay as currently set up.
right. What I liked about this board is this, it seemed like it gave the public an opportunity to weigh in, because these meetings, I think, did it say in here anywhere that they're going to be public? Or is that just assumed? But we could make that explicit, but I was hoping that the meetings could be public so that people out in the field could see what kinds of things were being discussed, and
I think any board
it has to be.
committee that has outside people in it has to comply with the public meetings law.
Okay,
If it's just if it's just made up of legislators, you don't have to. But if there's legislators and then some folks from the outside, you have to comply with the public meeting law.
okay.
So I would assume that you have to, because you've got the executive director, you've got the commissioner of BGS.
Yeah, otherwise the AOE is making all these decisions kind of in-house without any, right, Jill, without any.
That's what your rulemaking, which is a public process, but I take your point. I think I am concerned about the gatekeeping as being something that will potentially slow down the process significantly. But my question was, I swear there was a method to my question, which was, could we, thinking about the sort of reason for this board to continue to exist, One is that it does allow a place for public input, because you're right, once the AOE gets going on a program, we're not pausing for public input, we're running the program, right? So it does allow that. But we do need a mechanism by which priorities and bonus shares and kind of a look at the strategy of the program can be revisited. I know that Senator Weeks disagrees with me on this. I don't think that should only be the agency, but I also am concerned about it going through the legislative process every 5 years, because it could really be disruptive. And so that, for me, Chris, was one of the reasons why we would continue to have this board in sort of, and maybe after the startup period, you know, after 2 or 3 years, it moves to a semi-annual cadence or something like that. And they're tasked with every 5 years going through an advisory process where they provide input to the agency, and the agency is required to review its rules or something like that. I just think we need that mechanism in place, and it should be a collective, open and public process. In my opinion.
Should this be one of those, if we submit something to our standing committees, one of the issues that we really need to resolve is this just an advisory board, or does it have more teeth, and is it a gatekeeping board? Maybe that's how we approach, we just leave it the way it is, but that we just haven't been able to process it enough to know whether it should be gatekeeping or if it should be an advisory sunset. I mean, maybe this is one of those areas we submit.
Okay.
Because I think we actually all have a really reasonable opinion here, but we just
Yeah.
can't quite reach a consensus, and it's not for lack of trying, right? So I think to me that means there's very valid.
Okay.
Hope somebody's keeping track of these things.
I'll start a,
Because there was another one too, and I
Yeah,
don't remember
that-
what it was.
perhaps Martina and I, and then maybe with help from John and Beth, can look over kind of our notes of
Yep.
when we pass off in
Yeah.
January, where we know there are, and Jill and
Because there was another one.
collaborate on a document. Yep.
I mean, part of the difficulty there is that you also get into like a decision tree type, right? If you
Right.
get this, then you need to make these
Right.
decisions, so, yeah. Sometimes it's multi-step what you're having to lay on.
So can I bring us back to the composition of the advisory board?
Yes, I think actually, it's a good point too, even beyond the number 8. I don't know that the composition itself was actually ever fully resolved. These were initially included as placeholders. I think there was general agreement that these would have valuable input, and I know that we added the chair of the state board, so maybe there's consensus that these are appropriate, members.
Can I ask a slightly, like, if we are not bonding, then is there a need for the state treasurer?
Municipal. Treasurer. Well, we do, because you may have, you may have to set something up in the budget world, in the legislature, where you're gonna go to the state treasurer. Or something like a designated revenue source or special funds. I mean, the treasurer is the one that will implement a lot of this too.
And if you're doing the debt service subsidy model,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
makes sense in that context.
I was just trying to get them out of it.
But an odd number.
You seem very happy to be here.
Yeah. By all means, sign them up.
Let's jump down to what you see at the bottom of page 5. This is just flow through change, moving back to advisory board, moving that gatekeeping function and making clear that this is advising exclusively on those rules. I think that's the extent of the changes to the advisory board. We can go to the top of page 8. This is the sunsetting of that board. This is included provisionally. I don't know if there was consensus as to whether or not this was appropriate. But this is a 10-year sunset of that board. It sounds like the discussion around this is maybe in tandem with the uncertain nature of the board itself. So if you're holding off on making firmer prescriptions for that, maybe this can be left in place alongside it.
Mhm.
Section 5, I think we've already discussed permissible uses, and the request was to add emergency aid in some form to the permissible uses. But I'll pause here in case there's more to talk about.
So,
Jumping down to page 9, this is the meat of the program, your approval and funding structure. I think we've already hit a lot of the high points here. On page 10 at the very top, we talked about strategic plan of the State Board of Education, and then I think we paused and maybe moved to another subject matter. So I don't know if we did resolve this piece. This is, sorry, just to backtrack to what we're talking about. This is when reviewing a preliminary application, secretaries to consider, and this is your statewide educational initiatives and strategic plan. So this is a big piece of orienting what's meant to go into that consideration. I think there was concern around the lack of real standards and strategic plan from the state board, so.
My only concern about this one was what if the state board strategic plan is not in alignment with the larger statewide education initiatives? There is a world in which it is possible that the state board, I don't think that they would do this, but that they would decide to build their own strategic plan, and it might be misaligned with Education Commission, it might be misaligned with a whole variety of other things. So
Wouldn't that be a much bigger issue?
it would.
And that's a big issue that
So my
beyond
question
school
is,
construction.
yeah, the question is, do we just not specifically call out the state board strategic? I don't hope that they don't do that.
Would they be in tandem?
well, I don't think it exists right now.
It's not.
It's supposed to, it's part of their charge,
And they're not doing it?
but
I
they're.
also want to call out, they presented on this. and
Uh-huh.
Their timeline for that is like FY 28, for completion of some of these things. So they recognize that it's going to take quite a long time for them to build this, so,
Calling Beth for a moment.
yeah, please.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Council. Wait, John, you put that back.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. Very neat part. So, the state board is required to do this in state law. It does actually exist. It is 2 pages on the state board's website. Whether what is on the state board's website meets what the legislature intended by giving the state board this responsibility is a legislative policy question. I believe, heard or read in state board minutes that they acknowledge that that they don't have the staff and the time and the capacity to do everything the legislature has charged them to do. And the strategic plan, one of those items. I would suggest, as the education policy attorney, that anything you're putting into the school construction piece related to a vision for the state be consistent with what is in the rest of Title 16. And right now, this is what you got to work with. So if you don't want to have reference this, then I can work with John and the chairs to find some other language in Title 16 that is general to kind of the educational policy of the state. And whose policy are we following? But I would caution you on putting new priorities or new ownership over the statewide vision of education in just the school construction chapter.
So I hear you, thank you. So an option would just be to scratch line 4.
I mean, number 4.
I mean, yeah, sorry, number 4. Roman numeral 4.
Uh-oh, is that a problem?
No, it's not a problem. It just seems that the secretary this isn't my place to say, but the secretary considering the educational plan of the state, it seems intuitive for this, but it's
gotta be, you gotta have a plan out there that you.
Right, I guess the safe thing for me to say would be, if the sole reason that you want to strike this is concern about the state board, rather than having a program that follows a strategic educational plan, it sounds like there's other things that we could work with.
Maybe, but maybe there is no statewide plan for education right now, and maybe it won't exist for a few more years or several years. So do we want to, I don't know, do we want to tie ourselves to that? I guess is my question. Or do we just want to focus on the nuts and bolts of getting schools built and repaired? And I'm willing to take people's thoughts on that. I'm just asking.
Haven't we embedded our statewide educational priorities throughout the building of this? I mean, that's the prioritization points, that's the bonus incentives, that's the eligibility criteria, that's the assurances, it's everywhere. And we have to go through rulemaking. So I'm with you, John. We should be able to collectively point to a statewide vision for education, but we're in a transition period.
Yeah.
And so we haven't quite gotten there, like multiple entities haven't quite gotten there.
But you're looking at, this is under when the agency is reviewing a preliminary application for approval. The secretary needs to consider a variety of things, one of which is statewide educational initiatives and the strategic plan of the State Board of Education. This goes into the process of approving an application for preliminary. So do you want that application to comply with a statewide educational initiative, as well as the strategic plan that's laid out by the board, State Board of Education? That is your application that the district will be sending in to the Agency of Education for preliminary approval. Is that right, or is that wrong?
It's right that it's to be considered here. It's also correct that it's built into other components. I was just trying to caution that if the sole reason you wanted to get away from this one of four necessary considerations was on confusion over the state board, that struck me as maybe that could be worked around. But if that's not the sole reason, then it is built in other places. That's true.
Would you
I
like to
think-
say something?
I was just gonna say, why can't you just say statewide educational initiatives?
Right.
Yes.
Those are gonna
Just leave it at that and
Yes,
take off.
right?
That's, yeah, I would prefer, yes.
That's true.
Like that.
A little shorter.
Thanks, Beth. I thought about that and then I thought, look, that's too. I don't know, that's not like using proper. It's not pointing to anything specific, but maybe that's okay.
I think that's a very valid consideration. But you don't have anything more specific to point to right now.
Exactly. That's true.
And so that
Okay.
Representative Brady and Senator Buell know my favorite phrase is, that's a policy decision.
Okay, let's do it. Statewide educational initiatives.
Sounds good. Okay, so next big piece, we're on page 11. Starting on line 13, this is the flow through change from including the GovRec. So this will need to be built out a little bit more, and I can show 3448 to give an example of a more full approach. But what's set up here is we've already tasked in the earlier sections the agency with submitting this annual school construction funding request to the governor. But then following submission of that recommended budget to the General Assembly, certain committees would need to appropriate particular funds. I've truly left it placeholders here, X and Y. But let me just jump to 3448 if I can.
So, sorry, could we look really briefly at the secretary may approve a preliminary application if, and then there's 4 things that are listed?
Scroll back up.
I'm sorry, I'm still on page 10.
Line 3.
Line 3.
Lines, exactly, and then there's 4, are those the limiting factors? And do we want to specifically call out excessive energy use? Does that feel like a holdover from the previous program?
Yeah, these are your eligibility conditions essentially.
Well, and but it's saying we can only approve
Exactly,
the
exactly.
application if it meets these criteria, right?
So I think the excessive energy use is part of an or list, so it's not
Yeah.
that, but yes, it is one of the conditions that could make you eligible.
Yeah, I mean, these feel like, yes, an expression of priorities, right? And eligibility.
Right, this is where we'd included the new suggestions related to facilities master planning, and meeting achieving proficiency in the quality standards. But if there's a desire to remove, this is on line 9, the excessive energy use, I would note it's just one of the
I
permissible.
mean, it is a real thing.
It is a real thing. So my question is, are these including, right? You know, when we do our including language, which allows us to add more, or is this limited to?
This is limited. But
That's
these are your
how I read
eligibility
it, yeah.
But the excessive energy use is within a smaller subset that has an or, so it's not that you have to meet excessive energy use, but yes, these would be exhaustive of conditions for receiving approval.
So I would recommend on line 10 to take out electric space heat.
I would take out 9 and 10, but
Take out 9 and 10.
I mean, lines 9 and 10.
We can take it out. I'm just a little triggered because I come from,
I thought that was,
our school was 7 separate buildings attached by plexiglass walkways. And I mean, our energy
I thought
consumption
that was an
was
important piece, was
Oh,
the energy.
through the roof. I mean, it was
Yes.
just,
I mean, a lot of schools that were built in the 60s had electric heat. And then they've converted to biomass. Maybe there's something different there now.
we had biomass, but we also had.
Most of them now have biomass.
So to call out the difference that would make in that particular case, it would be if that project did not otherwise threaten the health or safety of students or employees, they were otherwise adequate to provide programs required by state or federal law, and the building was not deteriorated, then you would no longer be eligible under.
If you took out lines 9 and 10.
Exactly.
Right.
So part of the question is, do you think that those would be adequately picked up by other conditions, or are you just unconcerned about that, like that's not part of this program?
Yeah, I see where you're going. So I'm trying to think about the world of projects that we would want to fund. And what I want to make sure is that we don't accidentally disqualify them by like a close reading. So do we think that a project that is consolidating 3 small elementary schools and adding additional space to it to add a pre-K and increase other educational, like an after school, right?
Oh, that would be line 7, facilities. that-
Into an older building that's not very energy efficient.
Required by state or federal law or regulation.
To provide programs required by state law or regulation.
So we think that consolidating 3 elementary schools into 1 is covered there. See, Erin's making the same face that I'm making inside my head, which is like, I want to make sure that we're not so constrained that we accidentally disqualify those projects. Why would consolidating 3 or 4 elementary schools into 1 and adding additional programming meet the requirement of inadequate to provide programs required by state or federal law or regulation? They had 3 elementary schools sitting right there. They were perfect.
Can you tell me what you guys?
So are you just saying, are you thinking that, well, they just on their own want to consolidate?
Yeah.
But there isn't an issue of health or safety. There isn't an issue of inadequate facilities right now. There isn't an issue of excessive energy use, and those buildings haven't deteriorated.
Yeah.
But we
those
want
are
them to consolidate.
Yeah,
Would
those
that
are
be part
literally-
of your
what we want them to do, and I'm,
statewide educational initiatives?
yeah, if my team is
Capacity.
sitting there
Yeah.
reviewing these projects, under which one of these 4 things would that project qualify?
So I think part of what this draws out in the discussion is that when we earlier discussed eligibility conditions, or the group earlier discussed eligibility conditions, what you did is added new conditions, but
Yeah.
didn't closely examine the existing conditions.
Yeah.
So 1, 2, and 3, so that's line 4, line 12, and line 14, these were all in existing law. Pieces that the group has not spent much time on.
Okay. Would it make sense just to add or consolidate? One consolidate regardless.
What about, if you go back to page 9, lines 15 through 17, this is part of the approval. Yeah, it's part of the approval. And a secretary needs to consider regional educational opportunities needs, including school building capacities, available infrastructure, and neighboring communities. That's current law.
Yes, but it's just a shall consider, you
Yeah.
could consider and then
Yeah.
ignore.
And then section B is the actual eligibility criteria,
Right.
which are always part, right?
Yeah,
Those
so
are-
approve if.
Yeah.
In that Roman numeral I through 4 is in current statute.
I threw 3, sorry.
I'm looking at what we get.
Lines 17 through 21 on page 10 are.
I flipped to page 10.
Okay.
That's what I did. I flipped to page 10. So on page 10, lines 5 through 11 are current law.
5 through 16.
Current law.
Do we want to add a line or a provision that says statewide education, the secretary may approve a preliminary application if there is a regional desire to consolidate or something like that, a regional
What
push
if,
to consolidate.
what if it was the project will result in, that word efficiencies again?
Yeah,
The project will result in
regional efficiencies?
regional
It may not even be regional.
Ah,
It could be
okay.
your own district.
Yeah,
But you're
yeah.
consolidating 3 buildings into one.
Project will
I
result
mean, it could be
in.
that you're improving the delivery of larger class sizes. It could be that you're. I'm almost inclined to get rid of that first little section, that listing, right? The lists are limiting.
1, 2, 3, 4?
Yes,
Lines 5 through 11.
yes, lines 5 through 11. My only reason is I'm wondering if we haven't actually covered those under lines 12 through 21 and then on to the next page.
This is, we're laying out what the basis is for the agency to approve an application.
Could we consider that the fact that they're considering the application is because it's met all the priorities, like it's met it's already at the desk because it's addressing multiple concerns through the priority scoring. So to me, it almost seems like some of these are actually part of the priority scale, right? Threaten to health and safety. So if we just say that the secretary may approve a preliminary application that addresses one or more of the priorities, it seems as though that's taking care of any of these concerns, at least to me. Like the only reason there's an application on the desk to be considered is because it's checked off all the criteria to get to that point. So now it's not a matter of approving it to test it further for validity. It's just to say it's already been conceptually approved because it's gotten this priority score that's made it advance this far in the process.
So at this point, there wouldn't have been priority points assigned.
Not yet. Yeah, this is getting you can come in the tent if you've done X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
But I'm just wondering if we actually need to be this specific at this point in time, if we have all of the other eligibility criteria. And then to Bob's point, the priority points, once you've met these basic criteria for eligibility, they're not basic, they're actually really robust.
Yeah.
Once you're in the tent, then we will rank you based on.
But can I ask a stupid question? Lines 5 through 11. Is that included, those items be included in a facilities master plan?
I was just gonna ask that question too.
Because that's what you have on line 20.
Yeah, so.
The applicant needs to have completed a facilities
Yeah.
master planning,
Yes.
which would include
Yeah.
lines 5 through 11, correct?
Yes, it would. So the facilities master plan would have the quality and condition of every single building. It would consider its energy efficiency and use, right? It would consider whether or not, enrollments are declining or it can't adequately meet ADA compliance, or it's not suitable to serve, to meet FERPA for one-on-one consultation. Like, that's what the master plan should do. So to Alice's point, it is folded into the facilities master plan.
So if that's the case,
Then we don't need
strike 5 through 11.
It's slightly different than that. So
Okay.
facilities master plan might address all those things, but the procedural point to meet the eligibility condition here that that a municipality has completed the facilities master planning, which may address all of those concerns, is simply that, and if you look at the top of page 11, which is up on the screen, that plan engage robust community involvement,
Yeah.
consider regional solutions, evaluate contaminants, produce that plan that unites vision statement, educational needs, the like. Someone could meet those conditions. An applicant could have engaged in a master planning process that addresses those things, but doesn't fulfill a need occasioned by any of those criteria. So
Yeah. But that
It's-
would, sorry, John, that would be the consolidations, right?
but all they would, so it depends on how you think of, I think of eligibility conditions as a funnel, right? You're
Yeah.
saying I can exclude some, I'm letting some through. You can get through a facilities master planning process that's gonna say consolidation would be great in these areas. But it's not, you haven't limited the funnels, I guess what I'm saying. You haven't limited people from getting through. That's a process point.
Yeah.
Whereas what you see at the top of page 10, the project fulfills a need occasioned by, that's substantive. It's meet these conditions rather than follow X process.
But John, my point was, I think it's too limiting, because I don't see the consolidation example, which is actually something we want to
Right.
achieve.
Right, you could add, so if you were purely just trying to get at wanting regional consolidation, you could work around sub 1. So you could have the project or part of the project fulfills a need occasioned by these conditions, if you, let's just assume that those are agreed to, or you could have an or, and then you could have language addressing regional consideration there. So it would be an escape from meeting these needs here. You could say, you can meet one of these needs or fulfill a regional consult, something along those lines.
I mean, you just add another Roman numeral 5 to that,
Well, so
or not.
among the list of, when we're looking on line 4, this subdivision 1 up there, this and list, all of these conditions have to be met. So that's why it's seen as limiting, right? You have to meet currently as drafted.
It's an and or an or, because on line 10, you've got an or there.
Okay, so I'll say what the and is, and then I will say what the or is. So the and, here's what in the draft an application needs to do to receive approval from the secretary. It has to fulfill a designated need, so that's on line 4, sub 1. Sub 2, it has the need addressed by the project can't reasonably be met by another means. Cost suitable to the proposed curriculum and meets legal standards, and applicant achieves level of proficiency, district quality standards, and has completed a facilities master planning process. That's the and. So has to meet all of those conditions to receive approval. The or is for the set of needs. So you have to fulfill a particular need, but you can meet any one of these 4 conditions listed. If you wanted to get out of the fulfillment of needs condition, you could set this up so it says the project or part of the project fulfills a need occasioned by one of these sets of conditions, or alternatively, language related to regional
Will
consideration.
result in consolidation. What I like
What about a community school?
Community what?
A community school.
about it?
Which one of those needs would it meet? So we want to, we recognize that our rural schools, or sometimes our more urban schools, need to meet greater needs of students than just educational. So they're going to add on a health clinic and a store, like an in-house store that families can get sundries and that sort of thing. Which needs are being met then? Or which of these needs qualifies?
Well, I think the example you're pointing out is right, like, it's not meeting those needs.
Yeah.
So the
I'm
question,
concerned that our list,
Facilities that are inadequate to provide programs
that's
required
not,
by.
it's not state or federal law that says you have to have a community school. Nobody says you have to have a medical clinic, a dental clinic, a sundry office, mental health supports for your community. But it's something that we, as a state, are saying is a real need.
So what if we just added a 5 and a 6?
What if we just eliminate the list?
But here's for me, here's why we keep the list. Because when we have to go onto the Senate floor and sell this,
You need something specific.
you need to have some compelling language. And this, to me, is pretty straightforward and compelling. And if it's gone, we have to fill in a bunch of blank space.
I'm just worried about, and like, the things we haven't thought of because we don't have enough time and space to consider things. And so I just gave 2 examples that would not be covered by our original list. And so there may be other examples that I'm not thinking of on the fly.
So we can add the consolidation piece. Conditions that threaten the health or safety of students or employees, that not having that a sundry little store in that community school is threatening the health of the.
I actually, as someone who reviews these kinds of grants and programs, that doesn't pass the straight face to me. Like, I think it wouldn't for folks.
It's a
policy decision.
directly from the agency that you are delegating action to, that they don't agree with you, and that is a problem. That you should, if you want to solve it, this is your opportunity to solve it.
And Martine, I take your point. We need to be really specific about what we're funding and what we're not funding, right? Because the narrative is going to be, oh, you're going to fund Taj Mahals and turf and da, da, da. I don't think there's anything in the eligibility criteria or the prioritization criteria that would allow, that would result in us funding pools and athletic fields and Taj Mahals.
But this is the document that Mark Collins is gonna read.
But I'm saying, I think the remaining eligibility criteria are actually pretty robust, but also allow for projects to be put in front of us. Like Winooski, I'm not sure would have been funded under this list. as that project was completed, with their, like, sort of the village setup and all of those services, none of that was required by law. None of it was a life safety issue, but all of it was good work to support that community, its programming, and, you know, it's a community school model. So I'm concerned that this list and anything else that we might brainstorm right now might actually prevent really good projects from coming across our desk and being able to. But I think that the remaining eligibility criteria are really robust. The proposed type, kind, quality, size, and estimated cost of the project are suitable for the proposed curriculum and meet all legal standards. Like, that is a really, that's gonna save me.
I don't need. That's St. James Legislative Council. I see this as kind of. I see what Jill is saying. And again, as your one of your legislative council. I see what's under little I, the project of, or the part of the project fulfills a need occasioned by, and I think you've already said this, but they are limits on the types of projects for funding, right?
Yeah.
And so if the only criteria you want to have considered for eligibility for state construction are little 2 through little 5, which are kind of broader and not as limiting as 1, then great. But if you want to provide some limits, that's what little 1 is doing. But you get to decide what those limits are,
Yep.
and you can expand that list. Or you can tract the list.
Yep.
But if you take little I out, which is absolutely a policy decision that you could make, I could drive a bus through the rest of them.
Yeah.
For meeting eligibility criteria, and if that's what you want to do, great. But I see the first hurdle here, the little I or the little 1, as just that hurdle you have to get through.
Yeah. And
I
let
don't
me
know
just,
how to articulate it other than if you.
no, it's good.
This is where you're drawing some
Yeah,
lines,
right.
sending a message.
And just to play devil's advocate, in this current fiscal environment, maybe it isn't the time for us to be building community schools or renovating community schools. And maybe the Winooski project, it was okay that it wasn't, part of, I'm just pushing back a little bit.
So what if we added a new 5 that just addressed possibly the consolidation?
I said that like 40 minutes ago.
Right.
Okay.
What if we just, it could be consolidation within the district or outside the district? And leave it-
I don't have a problem with that. I think
Because that's one of our
consolidation
goals,
is a
right?
legit, yeah, I think it's a legit concern.
It's an or.
So if the discussion is about including language to get at the regional consolidation piece, I guess I would question the fulfilling a need occasion. I don't know enough about consolidation to say, but whether it's generated by a need to do something, which is why I proposed the more unwieldy structure of having 1, and the condition that you have to meet is the project fulfills a need occasioned by one of these lists or facilitates regional consolidation, which may not be fulfilling a need.
That makes sense.
Although it may be more complicated than I realize, but getting out of the fulfilling a need piece, but still making it a required condition.
Right.
You either have to meet a need or you've got to be achieving regional consolidation would be one way of getting at these kinds of examples which might fall through and not be funded by the program.
I
I think I disagree.
Yes,
But
that.
I think I disagree on this, but I think it's something that we could probably talk about
in the committee.
in committee, right? I can actually think of multiple projects at this point not qualify that I think would actually support high quality education. that is not being able to be delivered, and that are not huge projects, that are small projects, right? That they would not pass this. So I just think it's something to consider. I understand the need to constrain. And actually, Beth, I agree with you that if you take out little I, that you could actually, that would allow a lot more projects to get through the eligibility criteria, but it's why we have prioritization points. Just because a project goes into the tent doesn't mean that we're going to fund it, right? Like everyone always has to bear this in mind, that just because you're eligible doesn't mean you're going to get funded. It's going to be highly competitive to get funding. And that's why we have prioritization points. So I'm okay with letting it sit, but I do think it's something to consider. I think we're being too restrictive in who gets in the tent.
And that will be up before the standing committees, the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
The agency can make their case and testify, and other folks can make their case.
Yeah.
And figure it out.
Okay.
I just add one thing or ask one thing. Really just no way to rework this first sentence to make it not so limiting. To where it has to be one of the,
I think the intention was to be limited.
Yeah.
though.
I see this as, this is the eligibility condition. So this is the funnel that can be created to block certain projects and say, state funds only accessible to certain sets of projects. Like this is your place to say funds only available to these kinds of things.
So can you say where you would put the consolidation piece?
Yes.
Would it be a new,
So probably the way it would look is one, and then I'd have this one up here.
yeah,
It's gonna be so messy to look at. I can think harder about this, but I would have this set up. And you'd have all of these subdivisions still under this 1-1.
the 1 through 4?
And then it would be at the end of the 4, you'd have an or here. And you'd have 1, 2. And that second piece of this would say or facilitates regional consolidation. So the optionality that's provided is the first condition of the 5 that an applicant needs to meet is either that it fulfills a particular need, one of these 4, or it facilitates regional consolidation. Then you could proceed to the remaining 4 eligibility conditions. Does that make sense?
Do we want to take out regional? Just like an example, if it's within one district and you're just talking about 2 schools or something, like just say
It could be
consolidation.
consolidation within a district.
Not even include regional.
Yes, we have 6 elementary schools in our district, so.
Oh, we have 2.
Yeah, how many?
2, we had 3, we consolidated down to 2.
Yeah, like 11 at one point. We're down to 6. Well, way back, way back.
Yeah, way back, we had 6 neighborhood schools.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can, we can keep going, but I would just call it again, if you do want to, recognizing we're approaching the last meeting, but I do think it's worth noting that 4 and 5 are the eligibility conditions that were actively discussed, and 1, 2, well, now just 2 and 3 are those that have not been as discussed. If we jump down to page 11, starting on line 13, for request for legislative appropriation. So this is requiring AOE to submit a annual construction funding request to the governor. And then following submission, committees of jurisdiction to decide on an appropriation. But before you guys talk about the committees, let me jump to 3448 so you can see the more fulsome process. It's currently in place. So here you can see there's a date specified. Of course, in this case, it's not flowing through the GovRec, so you can specify a particular date. Presenting to institutions committees. Spelling out that prohibition with the General Assembly not revise the order of projects. And then specifying the format that the actual request comes in. So the list with assigned points, emergency projects, and extension of life of building.
Wait, John, can I ask?
Yes,
Okay, so it did say in statute that the legislature was not to reorder?
Yep.
Or,
We didn't pay any attention.
oh my God. Because I was gonna ask, do we need to put something in statute
Sometimes we would physically in the capital bill list which schools would get what money that year.
That was against statute. Nobody ever-
I'll do it.
I'll be around and point it out this time. Okay, good to know.
So you can do more here, but I think the concept is here. I guess the question that I have, obviously placeholder language for, is which committees you would like to be handling this. Obviously in the past, this was done through the capital bill, so you had institutions, but since we're switching to a different structure,
You know, it would be Ways and Means, Finance, Approach, Educate. I mean, I wonder if you just leave it to the submission of, in the governor's recommended budget to the General Assembly and not list committees, because I think it's, if you're changing it away from a specific funding source like bonded dollars, it impacts a lot more committees.
I know.
Bonded dollars, it was just, the Education Committee wasn't even involved in school construction. The only committee that understood school construction, the way it was, that had been structured, was the institutions committees.
Yeah, but that's, we don't,
But if you're not doing bonded dollars, you're expanding that to a lot more committees.
yeah,
So you can't really list what committees. I mean, if you're doing a special fund, that's gonna be housed in your appropriations committees, or possibly your Ways and Means and Finance with the Ed Fund. Then it's gonna be,
but we really want this work tied to what's happening in the education committees.
yeah.
Because we really wanted to drive programming, consolidation, ed finance, like all of these things should be. So I don't know, to me, it seems like it definitely needs to go to the ed committees and appropriation.
I mean,
Yeah,
Yes,
yes, please.
Yes, of course.
So one suggestion that might simplify the discussion is to not specify the committees, but say that it shall be submitted through the governor's recommended budget to the General Assembly pursuant to 34 VSA 306. Because the reason I say that is I know it is common practice in the legislature for standing committees to pick apart the governor's recommended budget and then weigh in on whatever sections they find of interest to them. And then they offer feedback to the appropriations committees. So you would,
do you do that?
Yeah.
so your committee, the policy committees would not be precluded from having these discussions. You know, I think whenever the GovRec comes out, we all start prepping it apart to find what is of interest to whichever committees we staff. So there would be an opportunity to have that conversation, whether that's in the ed committees, Ways and Means, institutions, so on and so forth. In my view, what matters less is specifying which committees get a report because you all will get the GovRec. It's more important, I think, to think about what information you want provided with the GovRec in addition to just a funding number. So John could always pivot back to what is currently required in 3448, but you all might want to have some discussion around whether you would want to see that same type of information submitted as part of the GovRec, or maybe some additional things. So like the one data point that kind of sticks out in my mind that you might want to request is, you know, in addition to the list of the projects that would be funded, but some details about what the amortization payments will be moving forward for those debt service grant awards. So, you know, it's not enough to know that, you know, Lower Schlevobia Elementary School is getting a grant, but figure out like how much is it for what, and what is that 20-year payment schedule look like?
So is the intention though, the intention is for the committees to be informed, but not to wait on the list projects, because that's, if we have prioritization points and we have eligibility criteria, if you have a review process, then the legislature should not be weighing in on the decisions that are the result of that review process. Beth wants to say something.
I give it a.
In the perfect world, that's true. In a legislative world, it plays out a little different. Because maybe there isn't enough money in the special fund. And they have to decide that our money only goes down to halfway down the list. Or it all depends who's sitting on those committees and who has power in the bill. And if it's their district and they want to bump it up the list, legislators will do that. That's the reality that we have seen in the past,
That seems inequitable.
until it's your
So what is the
district.
point of it specifically
What's your
saying,
district?
general shall not revise the order of project priorities presented? What's the point of that being in statute if, I mean, like, Beth, I think this, I am actually asking a really genuine question here. What is the point of having that in statute if the legislature gets to act as they wish? Do they have the authority to do so? Do they need to change statute before they do that?
Notwithstanding, notwithstanding.
So the legislature frequently will put policy things into statute, to sort of set the tone and the expectation, but of course, you can't really bind the hands of the future legislature, and they will often notwithstand things to deviate. I think that and I'm looking at this from my former experience with the transportation committees, where, you know, in my time there, the committees do not typically reorder projects that have already been prioritized. It's not like they don't typically cut a project in one district to substitute another project. But legislators typically want to know where that money is going and what the thought process was behind deciding these projects versus another. So I think their legislators may find value in having that level of detail, regardless of whether they are going to want to deviate from that. At the very least, people want to know what they're getting from the money and why these projects and not others.
The other thing too, I think you're gonna have to be aware of, and this is down the road, is we experienced this. Well, we had a moratorium back, it was in the late 90s. We had a very short moratorium on school construction because we were getting in a hole. Then we lifted it after about 2 or 3 years. Any construction projects that you've done during that moratorium time, in this particular case, any construction project that maybe would have been done and completed a year prior to this debt service program that we've set up, that district's gonna come knocking on the door.
Yeah, grandmother and.
They're gonna come knocking on our door to have their debt service picked up. And we can say, oh, no, we're gonna say no. If the chair of that committee or the speaker or the president pro tem is in that district, it's gonna bump something. That's the reality. But be prepared that there will be some previous construction projects that have been done. And those schools with the debt service will wanna come get some help.
Yeah, that's already happening.
Yeah. So, do the statute as strong as you can, hope for the best. But Chris, I think it's absolutely correct to have some form of a list and also indicate the accumulation of that debt service and what it's amortized over time, so people can see
We
it.
have a half an hour, so what do we want to do here?
Well, let's try to finish this little section we're in right
That's
now.
what I mean.
Okay, I'm comfortable with Chris's suggestion.
Take out the committee.
Take out the committees, but the specificity of the.
So I was going to add just to the discussion, I think it's completely fair to say that this information will flow to committees. People are going to be interested. The advantage you have in calling out particular committees, which no need to do this, but the advantage is you then assign responsibility for this quite significant decision to particular committees. So that to me is the advantage in calling out ones, but it's absolutely the case that the information is going to flow to the General Assembly and folks are going to look at this.
Yeah, I personally, when I look at the future of education in Vermont, I see like a short range fix to the property tax pressure that we're feeling. a medium range plan that really rethinks funding at large, and then a long range plan that incorporates everything that we're doing in here. And I have a feeling that the 1 and 2 that I just mentioned are probably gonna be in finance. So this, I really think it's important that it go to, at the education committees. Because I think the other stuff is gonna be more of probably in the finance committees. And I think the work needs to kind of be shared. That's my personal vision, but, I don't mind the ed committees being called out.
I'd agree with that. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but I agree when you say it like that.
And then it'll probably go to other ones too.
Yeah.
Did you want to specify form of setting out the request, or is that, you think, wait till session and work through those technical details of, like if you would like to have, an itemized list with debt service subsidy, what you're.
We need an itemized
I
list.
want it in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's, you can refer to section blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's currently in statute, but you
Yep.
do have some
Got it.
listing, and based on what Chris said about the debt service and the accumulation over the years, your money committees need to know how that's going to impact your
Yep.
base funding
True. Yep.
going forward.
Okay.
Right, we talked about, final approval for construction aid, so we can jump past that. Award of construction aid, we have discussed, you guys have discussed. I don't, a base amount was settled on, but that was kind of the big lingering question, so.
Oh, we didn't get to that?
Christie Cups and Sue. Okay. Yeah, that'll go to the committee.
That will go to the committee, that would be my letter, the base amount, and then bonus amount, and we haven't resolved base amount or the bonus amount.
Not resolve the base amount, not put in a number even for the base.
I don't know.
So John, I think we're gonna anticipate a strike through of pretty much what's in the rules around the.
What are we doing, 10%, 12%?
Yeah, so this section would be replacing what is 3448. So you could specify a number here, or if there's just entity to do that, then I could just lay out. This could be a place to specify that it's going to be payments going toward debt service subsidies rather than construction projects themselves.
Chris Taylor, do you want to say something?
I'm just trying to consider a base amount, and I think we actually should put a number in
We were just
to send it off with.
saying 10 for base. Base. No.
I would consider higher.
I think that we do need to build in need somewhere, right? Is it in the priority points? Is it in the bonus incentive? Is it in the base share? Like, I think that has to be addressed.
Don't you have it already in your priority scale?
I mean, it was a sample priority scale. I don't know that.
Right. But in the sample that you have need.
Yeah, well, I think let's just identify where it is in the program that we want to build it in, right? Like Chris, you had suggested a bonus share. I don't quite wrap my head around the mechanics of it. Or is it in the base share?
I would prefer not to put it in the base share at this moment while phases 1 and 2 of what may or may not happen statewide haven't happened yet, and we have a pretty complicated calculation already in our education funding around need and pupil weighting and Act 127. And so given that those are the reality we live in right now, I would feeling like I would rather not compound that at this moment. I see the need for it.
I would
But I would-
say, I would argue not putting it in the priority points because I think it should translate to dollars. And the priority points are not dollars, right? There's either base or there's bonus. That's actual money.
So to find the base, we're just pulling a number.
Yeah,
percentage. I'm just wondering if there's any way that JFO between now, this meeting, I know the next meetings are final. If we did a scenario of 3 schools ready to go, $100 million each. Is there a way that we could get to figuring out how much that debt service is for each one of those schools
So
over 20 years, and then we could see, is the debt service for those 3 schools on $100 million gonna be $1 million a year for each school?
And so I would actually direct the group to the report from AOE and the treasurer from a year ago and some of the treasurer's earlier testimony to this group, because they already modeled some scenarios like a 20% and I think a 40% share. And those are scalable. So I mean, just, divide a 20% in half. That gives you a rough ballpark. You should know that all of those numbers are abstract models that are based on sort of assumptions about what interest rates will be that may or may not be true in the future. But you already have those scenarios in front of you to give you that context.
I believe it's all in Appendix E of the task force report. For your viewing pleasure.
Yeah, that's right.
when you're thinking about a share, it really is pulling a number out of the hat because it's an empirical question. If you are trying to incentivize particular directions, what you would need to know is what number is going to move them for schools. So
That's a big spot.
if you choose a number today, it is just going to be a placeholder for something.
Okay. It seems like the question on the table is to how to handle need. But no, yes or no? No?
In what aspect? What do you?
Where does it fit on in the program? Where does the need? Financial need of a community, let's say.
Is that for their paying their debt service?
Yeah, and for what they get, if there's a 10% base across the board, is that regardless of like the financial state of the community?
It's just flat, then that's what you're, yep.
And I thought I heard Jill say, that didn't seem adequate or.
10% seems really low to me if we want to, well, okay. 10% seems low to me, but that is not knowing what our bonus share looks like either, right? So if we are doing bonus shares of 5% for different projects and they can stack them up to 50% or something like that, then I get that. We're driving towards really particular kinds of projects. It's very like narrowly focused, right, towards a specific goal. I don't, and I don't think that in many communities, 10% is going to move the needle on getting bond passage. Maybe in some of those where they're like, 50 votes is what their last bond went down. Rhode Island actually starts with 30% and then goes up. I don't think that we have necessarily these kinds of resources. And their base goes way up. So those high poverty communities, it's like 80% is their base share. I don't think, yeah.
I think their portfolio is worse than ours to start with. From anecdotally, when I talked to people in Rhode Island, it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, we're bad in some places. Don't underestimate us.
Okay.
I just think they have a different distribution.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the base and then I'm thinking about the bonus. Wouldn't the rules that are implemented promulgated a deal with what would qualify for those bonus and how much? Do we want to get into those specifics in statute? You get 2%
No.
extra bonus.
No,
for
I think
blah,
we
blah, blah.
should-
That would be the rules
Right,
that would
that's
do
in
that.
Base should be in-
Base we set in
It's the base.
statute,
Right,
but
but we
in
gotta
terms
decide,
of bonuses,
right,
that's done by rule.
so we gotta decide how heavy, our base is going to be based on
Right.
how heavy the.
Yeah, you actually have to answer the bonus share.
Right.
Well, maybe we do a floor for the base and then we end up in statute having a cap of overall.
Mhm.
And how you get to that overall will be done by rules.
Right, so like if we had a 15% base, and then you could cap it off 30 or 40%, I can't see us going higher than 30 or 40%, to be honest with you. I would love to, I'd love to go up to 80%, so we could help communities, but I just think financially Vermont isn't able to do that right now.
15%, what that figure is.
Um,
I mean,
well, we can always put a number here, y'all, and then they can get changed in committee.
It will.
I was gonna throw out the 20 because that's what's in there that's
Yeah.
modeled a
Okay,
bit.
let's
I
do
mean,
it.
And this is so arbitrary.
Yes.
It's
I'd
arbitrary.
be okay with that,
That's
too,
okay.
20, and then,
Let's do 20.
but what would be the ceiling, right? And then we're looking at not much room for the bonus.
So this is one thing, is if you assume a cap, then the lower the floor you have, the more effect you can have with your bonus.
Right, true, right, yeah.
So it's in terms of incentivized.
Right.
But if the floor is so low that no one's incentivized to do it until you
Yeah.
reach a threshold, then it's sort of meaningless that that's the case.
Right.
Yeah, and when we did our kind of proposal for the bonuses, we didn't add any percents because this is the conversation, right? And Aaron, you had said when we first proposed this, you wanted to start with a lower base and then make those bonuses really quite meaningful.
Yeah, it's like.
Maybe, and then, but at a certain point, you reach a limit, right? We cannot afford to fake number, go above 50% as a threshold, no matter what combination of things you have, base plus poverty plus bonuses, we're maxing out at 50% as a state.
Because the massive difference between us and Rhode Island too is that, Julia's and I used to like, these are all state dollars too. Like the percentages, the Rhode Island model is a very different ed finance model, wherein it's, truly state subsidy versus this is far more complex in our current ed
In
finance.
our current, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And we have to
So-
sort of live in the limbo that by the
Right.
time we are rolling these
Yeah.
funds out, it's likely that we won't actually have exactly what our current funding system is. But how do we build for that
Right.
future state is really
I'm
hard.
thinking of bonus. Like how many different areas of bonus are we thinking,
We had some proposed.
right?
I mean, we haven't really dug into those. But I think we had 4 or 5. I'd have to pull.
It's like 5 or 6,
How many,
yeah.
John?
something like that.
Right, so if you did, I mean, you could weight them different too, they don't all have to be like 2%, but.
Yeah, that's right. That's how you can.
Right, but you can set a cap of all bonuses of being an extra 10, 15, 20%. Just weigh them. It will actually enroll making. We want to kind of drive,
Yep.
but what's gonna be the base?
Wait.
10, 15, 20, 10 going once,
Chris, what if any idea?
10 going twice.
So if we go 20.
I think it comes down to, carrots and sticks, right? And like how firmly do you want to wield this as a tool for getting strategic change versus how do you want to use this program to sort of fund decisions that might not be quite as strategically aligned with
Yeah.
you. So, in my mind, you won't realize it, nobody wants to hear it really, but there's not gonna be enough resources to be everything to everyone. So, in my mind, that lends my thinking to be a little bit more of a higher base level and maybe a little bit less of a role for bonus incentives. So like, it's my ideal world, maybe it would be a 20% base and you don't go any higher than 40%, for example. I think the more bonus type things you layer on, the further you might get away from how strong your strategic angle might be. But that's a decision for you all to consider. I don't know if a base amount as low as 10% necessarily buys you a lot of strategic change. It could just cost you a lot of money.
Yes.
I would, but I'm comfortable with the 20 base for now, and we're probably not gonna get there today, but I would like 1 or 2 bonus. I would start with very few bonus.
What would be the?
But a larger
cap?
percentage.
30
Right,
total?
larger percentage, but there's only a couple categories of
Right,
it.
let's figure out which way we
We're
really
not
want to go.
incentivizing a whole bunch of things might be happening, but we're only driving towards.
So what would, if we started the base at 20%, what would be the cap? 30%, 40%?
For high needs communities, or do you mean overall?
No, I mean overall, I'm just looking at our financial picture and seeing what could be paid for year after year after year in our budgets.
Yeah, we need to be realistic.
You know, if we start at 20% base, and then we have a couple things for bonuses, what's the final cap? Is it 30%? Is it 40%?
May I throw out that
Yes.
setting the base amount is not gonna tell you how much money you're gonna spend in a year, so a higher base amount doesn't mean that you're gonna spend more money in a year. It's just gonna say which projects those funds go to, so it's really more about if you would like to incentivize particular projects, because you could have a year in which you fund 2 things at 40%, or you could have a year in which you fund 6 projects at 10, you know.
But you may not have that budget capacity in that year to fund those 6 or 7 projects. That's what tanked us. That's what I'm thinking, the longer, I'm not thinking just 1 year, I'm thinking over 10 years, because you're gonna accumulate every year.
Right.
So that request of money in our general fund or ed fund, wherever it's coming from, is gonna grow.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just mean to say that the effect of raising or changing the share amount is really gonna be borne out in how many projects are funded in a year, rather than necessarily total cost to the state in a given year.
I'd be comfortable with the 20% put in for now. I mean, it's gonna go to other committees.
Yeah.
It's probably gonna change in other committees.
Going
Base.
once.
I mean, I think that's something we especially need feedback on from
The
school board
experts.
superintendents, like the people that build the business officers, you know, that build budgets, that have, you know, quite frankly, some of ours that have done big bonding projects or had them fail. Kind of see that.
And I don't think we can go lower than, I mean, I don't think anything under 20% is gonna be an incentive for.
I don't know.
School
I
districts.
think communities are aware of the crisis. They're aware of the needs that they have, and they are gonna be any like ring, whatever you call it, this like, you know, anything lifeboat will be helpful. So I know 20 doesn't seem like much, but believe me, it's better than nothing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And, yeah, I think we should do it. And
So-
then we should wrap up.
Yeah, so let's put in 20. Let's look at what we have to resolve in our next meeting, which is gonna be sort of 2 hours or less on Zoom, and then let's get the date for that one.
I'll just close out this then. I think we don't need to touch these pieces, and we've already talked about section 8.
Yeah.
John, the condition of state aid.
Might need to take a look.
So minor revisions. Right now, there's there's no, right now, if somebody received state aid in 1960, we're supposed to recoup that. So I think we could probably align to the federal interest, which is, it's like, something like 15 years or when the.
Break.
They're like, ew, gross.
It's also mine, so.
Well, they would pick us lines like.
I was just trying to get into my email to tell you
Yeah.
guys what we got, but.
Working.
I have it right here.
The fourth floor up here.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I can't get to
If you wanna look at what those bonus shares might be, I mean, the ones that we put in our proposal, if folks wanna go back and look, they were all pretty like high leverage.
Yes.
So if folks want to kind of.
Let's do, could we do dates real quick for the?
Yeah, I'm saying, so like,
And then
just
if you have a few minutes yet, John, so we can make sure that we've got what we need to do between now and the next.
I can't get into my email, so.
Okay, so the 4th is, we're taking that off.
Yeah, no, for it. We're already busy all day.
There were a variety of times thrown out for December 5th and December 6th. And again, we're looking at 2 hours max. Everyone's on Zoom.
I like the 5th, 10:30 to 12:30.
5th works for me.
5th?
Anytime.
I can do, I can move things to do 10:30 to 12:30.
I could probably do it. It's more difficult for me because it's time of the day. I'd be easier doing afternoon and.
And for being at school, like either early or late would be better.
Exactly.
It just eats into a whole bunch of mods.
So Friday afternoon.
I can probably make anything work on those 2 days. It's just gonna be easier for me.
You're
See,
I can do Friday morning, but Friday.
I'm working this way. I'm a behavior interventionist.
Behavior interventions.
Friday morning? No bueno?
Well, I could
I can do
do.
Friday morning, I can't do Friday. Friday afternoon's gonna be really challenging.
Friday the 6th?
Yeah.
I'm wide open. I got nothing going on that day.
If we're on Zoom, could we do earlier? Like, I know you potentially have a conflict.
Yeah, I have a thing and nothing, it's like 9:30 to 11. I mean, I don't have to do it, but
Oh, no, I could do it, like,
Yeah,
it's
early.
easier to do either early or late.
Like the middle.
oh, so you're saying like 10:30 to 12:30 on Thursday is tough.
It's not just.
But you could do 9:30 to 11:30
I
on
mean,
Do
Thursday?
11 be even the earlier or the
We're
later?
talking about Friday now.
I know, but I'm just trying to,
It'd be easier,
what would be easier?
just the earlier in the morning or the later in the afternoon.
So could we do Friday, 8:30 to 10:30?
That'd be great.
I don't even have to move any meetings, that's
I
exciting.
mean,
for me.
it's Zoom, so we don't have to go anywhere, right? So.
Yeah.
Bob, can you get up, get your coffee, get your computer by 8:30?
Yes.
How's that? Thanks, Bob. Senator,
I got an 11 o'clock appointment,
that should be all right then.
8:30 to 10:30?
8:30 to 10:30 Friday morning.
Yeah. No, don't get your card.
Stay at home, you can have your PJs on.
That's right.
It's on the bottom, not on the top.
So, but you not to go there.
All right.
So the 6th,
The 6th. Megan, is that okay? Wonderful.
That's cool, yeah. That's good.
Fantastic, and that'll be the penultimate, and that will be the ultimate, the end. It'll all be done, all the work is done at that point.
8:30.
8:30 to 10:30.
Then we just have to start building some schools. Good. Would you guys like to come to Burlington to tour our future high school?
Driving past it the other day.
It's
It's big.
I'd love to do it.
really big.
Add some kids friendly.
Yeah, we might. There will be some consolidating happening, I think, one way or another. Either within district or over time. If enrollment projections continue, if the trends continue. Yeah.
Alright, we want to call it there, and John, if you have a couple minutes.
Yes.
We can sit and make sure we're
Aligned.
aligned on what we're gonna do between now and then. I will start the draft of the cheat sheet to ourselves when we go to committees in January, and then share it with Ledge Council, sort of the big unresolved things.
So is the thinking that the bill
I don't call
will be introduced by the 3 senators and then the 3 House members? Is
Yeah.
that the thinking?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
if we're. Really, I think that'd be great.
Super.
I moved to adjourn.
All right.
Yeah. Go play on my new iPad.
What made you chair?
I just made a move. You say no. Yeah.